Well, it's time for your feel-good story of the day. The Wyoming Republican Party chair decided to openly muse about the possibility of Wyoming seceding from the Union. Wyoming is like an over 70% Republican state, so the head of the Republican Party discussing this is a pretty serious matter, because if the GOP in that state wanted to, if they really felt strongly about this, and they wanted to hold some kind of a referendum on the matter, it would pass in that state, particularly after this past election. And I think that's probably what, that's definitely what's spurring this guy to say this. It was in an interview about Liz Cheney, the disgraced Wyoming Republican who should have never been elected to begin with, but the Cheney name still carried some weight. Dick Cheney is from Wyoming, and she now holds his old seat in the House. And like most Republicans, this man feels that the election was stolen. Now, in case any YouTube censors are listening, I'm not saying that the election was stolen, not by any means. This is just this man's position. And this has radicalized a lot of people in the Republican Party against the federal government, which I have been saying is only a positive thing. I'm happy to see more state Republican chairmen coming out and talking like this after Alan West's statement, which at the time I said would lead to the normalization of the idea of secession as a possibility, as a remedy to an out-of-control federal regime, to an establishment which will not be reined in by the voters. Alan West, of course, came out with his very momentous statement saying that, perhaps the states who believe in actually following the Constitution should form their own new union. Kind of tongue-in-cheek, but also kind of not, because it was not the kind of thing that people in this country joke about. And especially in a state like Wyoming, which is votes over 70% for Republicans, if the Republican Party wanted to go forward with something like this, it would happen. They would get it done. Now, what I find interesting is that the common left-wing response to this is no longer that, oh my gosh, these people are traitors, which I find interesting. Some, if you look on Twitter, and when I say left, I mean like your left liberals, not real leftists, not good people, just sort of vapid, empty MSNBC viewers. The two responses I'm seeing are one, sort of derisive, and two, encouraging but in a condescending way, which is absolutely fine. The first one, the derision, is sort of getting making fun of them for being poor and saying, oh my gosh, look, you guys are net tax takers. You get more money back from the federal government than you pay in taxes, so you're going to go broke if there's no federal government to help you. Which, of course, is, that's something that only really a left liberal could think mattered. Everyone else knows that, 99% of all federal spending is an absolute waste of money. And, of course, the federal government does not have a balanced budget. So to say that a state is taking more in tax dollars than they are paying out does not necessarily mean that they're in any worse financial shape in that sense than the rest of the union. And so, obviously, Wyoming would not be able to print U.S. dollars. They would print, Wyoming dollars or something, which would crash their currency. But I mean, that's, these are not. That's not like it's not an actual serious problem. I mean, anyone who thinks that losing federal money for the interstate, for example, would just cripple the state of Wyoming is they're being, I guess, a bit optimistic. Now, the second kind of response I'm seeing to this online are people who are saying, good, get out, we don't like you. And that's the exact correct response. That's what I want to see from left liberals and from conservatives if the left liberals talk about it, which is what I was expecting if Trump had won re-election, if Trump had won the re-election. I actually only supported Trump's re-election, very late into the game because I wanted to elicit sort of a secessionist inclinations from the left, because I thought that they were in the mood where they might go ahead with it. Newsom has spoken of California, for example, as its own nation. And of course, Podesta, in their little war game from the Transition Integrity Project, had, playing Joe Biden, encouraged California and the entire West Coast to secede and proclaim Biden president. And a horrible, horrible response, which unfortunately was ingrained in America for generations after the first war between the states, is that, this is awful treachery if any state wants to separate, and that must be punished with death and blood and all this stuff, which is a horrible, barbaric idea. And a much more civilized idea is just that, hey, you guys don't want to be a part of the union anymore, go ahead, get out, we don't want you if you don't want to be a part of it. That's very healthy. That's, freedom of association. That's people just saying, hey, we're going to go our separate ways. There's absolutely no reason why someone in California should care whether Wyoming is a part of the United States or not. And so we want to encourage this attitude. When not that I recommend talking about politics ever in any conversation, but if you get into a conversation about this, and somebody says, I hope they get out. That's what they deserve. They'll be a third world country. You should not, don't take offense to that. Agree with them. Even though they're trying to be nasty, don't let them. Kill them with kindness and say, yes, no, I agree. People who do not share the same values should not share the same government. That's an unsustainable state of affairs. And you don't want all these hicks in your country anyway. Wyoming is the cowboy state. Who wants cowboys around? They do all those nasty things up on the mountain. Now, of course, Wyoming would not be the first state to secede. Far from it. This chairman of the Wyoming GOP actually was confirming something that I had also predicted after Allen West first sort of implied that he was considering advocating for secession, a very mild sort of statement. What this Wyoming guy was saying is that they're watching what Texas is going to do, and they're strongly considering if Texas asserts its sovereignty, that perhaps they'll do the same. And that's why I focused a lot on Texas. I think Texas has to be the one that goes first. Texas has to be the first domino to fall. They have the longest history of secessionist sympathies or inclinations. They have the history of being a short-lived republic for 9 years, an independent country. There's this idea of the Republic of Texas. They have the same flag going back to that time when they were an independent country. And of course, they are a Goliath in the Electoral College, and without Texas in the Union, no Republican state has any chance at having any sort of influence on the national level, neither in the House nor in the White House, because there wouldn't be the electoral votes, and you wouldn't have all of the Republican congressmen from Texas. And at that point, the Dems would probably, would definitely pack the Senate. They would make Puerto Rico, D.C. states. They would split California up into a few states. And so the Republicans would be politically vanquished. And at that point, their only real option, other than total capitulation to the Democratic Party, would be to join Texas in seceding. But that does not happen overnight. These sorts of sentiments have to build up over time, and this is a part of that, normalizing the idea, having the conversation about it. People in the South, for example, in the antebellum South, were discussing secession for quite some time before it ever actually happened. But, back then, it was obviously a very different dynamic, and not just because of the whole slavery issue. Obviously, at every time when you're going to have countries breaking apart, it's going to be about different issues. But back then, it was sort of an intra-elite struggle. It was the elites of the South who benefited from slavery against the elites of the North, the industrialists, who benefited more from free soil. And while the vast majority of Southerners who were poor white trash And we're still not allowed to use that, even though that sounds like a very offensive term. That's the term that is used. It's unfortunate, but that's the way it is. Those people, they were strong Southern patriots who would, of course, believed in the cause of being their own country because they loved where they lived, and they, of course, would want a more local identity than being a part of the great grand union. But they had no personal interest in slavery. In fact, they were the ones who were harmed, other than the slaves themselves, the most by slavery, because there's no competing in a labor force with stolen labor. I mean, a slave, once you purchase them, their labor costs you $0. You're stealing all their labor. So how could a free man ever compete with that? You couldn't, and that's a large reason why all these people were stuck in poverty. There was no path to any sort of economic success. And so our modern dynamic is very different, because here you have across the country sort of the urban elite gentry versus the heartland of everywhere. It's not so much one elite faction versus another. Southern rights were not such a populist cause in the 1860s. They have sort of a, the post-Civil War nostalgia was more populist in nature than the cause that led to the war itself. But in modern America, what is pushing people to consider the idea of secession are much more popular issues that affect the common man in this country. Gun rights, for example, I think being chief among them. Immigration being another one. That affects the jobs of lower income Americans, not the elites. And of course, it, in my opinion, more importantly and more permanently, changes the political makeup of the electorate. And so with a little help from people further up the chains of power, normalizing the idea of secession in the minds of the common man, I think you'll see much more of a bottom-up push for it than you would have in the 1860s. And that's something that I really have to thank Trump for, because, were it not for Trump, a lot of these people would have a lot more faith, unquestionably, in our federal system. The reason why so many ordinary Republican voters are questioning things now is because they saw how Trump has been treated, namely since November the 3rd, but really all the way back to 2016. They honestly thought up until that point that if they just elect the right guy, they will be able to drain the swamp and clean out the DC elite. But, I think the phrase that the Trump supporters use is that the swamp was much deeper than we thought. And that is what will push people to look for more radical solutions, to try and remove themselves from the situation rather than trying to clean up the current situation. And so I guess an upside to what I discussed yesterday with that immigration plan is that if they really make a hard push for it and fail, that could wake a lot of people up, because the prospect of legalizing all the illegals would, in my opinion, secure a permanent Democratic majority at the federal level. And so if a lot of Americans come up to the brink with that and see that possibility, and then, it doesn't come to pass, that might wake even more of them up. It might make them think, hey, we better get out of this union before the union fundamentally alters our state in an irreversible way. I think that is an idea that would really resonate in a state like Texas that is concerned about losing their, what's left their Republican majority to illegal immigration, and also, the large percentage of the Mexican-American population in Texas that is shifting towards the Republicans, and tends to be not the biggest fans of just free immigration for all of these Guatemalans and Salvadorans and all these other people who are from to the south of Mexico. And so perhaps Biden bringing immigration to the forefront so early on could be something that antagonizes Texas in particular, that inflames secessionist sentiments in Texas in particular. And once, again, if they can just push Texas out of the Union, then the rest of the dominoes will begin to fall. So, with that said, if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. If you haven't already, please do subscribe because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So, I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.